Well, welcome back to Pastors on Porn, and we have an exciting guest today. But before we introduce him, let me just say, I'm sure as pastors you've all had the experience of giving a message and then Monday seeing something or thinking of something or watching something, and you go, oh, why didn't I share that the day before? It would have been so good to have that the day before. So I certainly have had that experience, and last podcast, I talked about this whole question of, am I a sinner or am I a saint? And I was watching a video today, and it was interviewing a Scottish monk. And he was describing himself, and this is how he described himself. He says, I'm a sinner. But before I was a sinner, I was a beloved sinner. And it's like, oh, I love that. Because, there's no dichotomy between having a secure identity and this question of, are you a sinner or are you a saint? I believe that I'm a sinner, but I also believe I'm a saint. But most importantly, I believe that I am a beloved Son of God that has been bought and purchased by his blood. And for me, the question of identity has been rooted and secured. And so I want to just clarify that that I'm a sinner, but I am a beloved sinner. And I just love that description that has to precede this whole question. Do you know that you are a beloved son or daughter of God? So first of all, I wanted to add that to last message. And let me also say, I heard a comment that someone was worried that when I talked about keeping a gun, that I was going to off myself or something. But you got to track with me here. I was using a zombie reference. We talk about zombies a lot between me and my wife. One of our favorite movies is I Am Legend with Will Smith. And we always joke that nothing good happens after 5 p.m. And so, we like to have a bottle of bleach on the front porch and, put that on the front porch because that's when the zombies come out. And if you track with me, the whole idea is that there is a zombie part of us, a part that is fallen, is broken. It is a part that is in rebellion to God. And whenever that rises up, like a good Walking Dead reference, we know that a double tap is necessary, preferably as close to the brainstem as possible. And the bigger the caliber of weapon, the better. So all of that was around the idea that I am daily in dependence with God. And each day I need to get up and say, Lord, with you, I will walk in victory. And whenever the zombie wants to rise in me, that's when I reach for my weapon. So let me just put all of our fears, hopefully that makes you know that I'm still going to be around, God willing. And I wanted to say that as a point of introduction.
Okay. Let me say welcome to a couple guys that I have just got to meet. Trevor Winsor and Nick Stumbo are West Coast buddies, although I'll be at a couple states or provinces south of us here on the West Coast. And it's great to have you both online. I listen all the time to the just your podcast, the Pure Desire podcast. I love your openings. That's a really important part of my day.
Was I supposed to have one ready for this podcast? Yeah, you always come up with one. We're good.
I have a new one that I've never heard yet that I'm waiting for, and it's How About Them Cowboys? I've not yet heard it from you guys.
You have to be a Cowboy fan for that. That feels like I'd be supporting the Cowboys.
Yeah, and too many of my friends are Seahawk fans, so I just thought I'd mix it up. I have to get through Seattle. To get down to you guys. So, anyways, it's I just want to throw that out there if the Cowboys have a good year.
All right,
and
this year, who knows?
Absolutely. Well, let me just say, the whole idea of this podcast, Pastors on Porn, is all about giving a resource for those who are in ministry, those who are wrestling with just sexual brokenness and don't have a safe place to turn. And I know both of your guys' background is in some pastoral ministry. So could you both just give me just a quick highlight of what your time as pastors and a little bit of the look and feel of what that was like?
Yeah, mine's a little probably shorter than Nick's, but I grew up in a house. What you're saying is I'm older. Yeah, I was actually telling you had more experience, but you can go there if you like. Sure. So for me, I grew up in a Christian home. Mom and dad were in ministry a lot. So my dad was a pastor for the better part of a decade in my adult years. And I grew up just around ministry. And I remember at the age of, I think it was 15 or 16, I had a young life leader who I hold no bitterness toward that I said to him at one point, I want to be a youth pastor someday. And he's like, I don't know. If you could do anything other than ministry, you should do it. And so I was like, cool, not doing ministry, moving on, doing something else. At that point, I was playing baseball, and so I figured that was going to be something I'd do. But yeah, I got into school, was studying business, decided after taking financial accounting it wasn't for me, and wanted to do something more exciting, jumped into a psychology degree, which I just finished paying off, praise the Lord. And yeah, I was looking into doing life coaching, and there's a seminary here out in Portland called Western Seminary that had a life coaching program. And I was 22 at the time, and the Lord just, I felt like He talked to me and said, hey, you realize that a pastor coaches a lot of people, that that's something that you can do. And I was like, all right, Lord, like, whatever you want me to do. I've been involved in worship and done some music stuff throughout my college career. At the time of graduation, my church that my dad was pastoring at was going through a church split. They needed someone to lead worship. And ignorantly, I was like, hey, yeah, I'll pick songs and sing, like, no problem. That's all worship ministry is, right? And,
Yep.
Stepped into leading worship, did that for 2.5 years. And then really from then on, just found that I have a love and a passion for the church, to see the local body of Christ just doing their thing, growing, maturing, reaching out. And through worship ministry, I ended up getting hooked up with a bigger church. Was not really on staff, but just serving a bunch. And they had planted a church about 10 years before, and they're like, hey, they're looking for a youth and worship guy. Would you want to do it? And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And jumped into pastoral ministry, and sort of at the same time was getting healthy, actually in this area, of sexuality, and praise the Lord for that. But still been working at Pure Desire for about 3 years now. I'm out of pastoral ministry, still licensed, still do some stuff here and there. But for me, I just continue, whether I function as a pastor or not, just love to see people grow, mature, and change, and develop. So that's a little bit of my pastoral experience.
Well, it's funny. I was going to be an accountant at one time too. So back in business program at UBC. So I don't know what it is with burnt, accountants or something, but how about you, Nick?
Man, being an accountant was the last thing on my radar. I grew up in a pastor's family. So when I became a pastor, I was actually a third generation pastor. I joke now, I have PK, I was a PGK. I was a pastor's grandkid. And just a lot of family members that are in ministry and serving in different church capacities. So there was a lot of that just kind of growing up. Well, you make a great pastor someday, and I didn't necessarily want to pursue that. I wanted to make a lot of money and be famous. And so I was thinking through careers that were what I thought of as rich and famous. And it was at the end of my junior year that God really got a hold of my heart, and I felt the call to ministry and a call to just be used however I could be. I thought initially that might be missions, and really pursued a degree in missions for quite a while, but then ended up going more into pastoral and church planting ministry. And so right out of college, became an associate pastor at a mid-sized church in Washington, where I'd actually interned, and my wife was from Washington, so it worked for us to move back out here, and ended up being at that church for 14.5 years, first as the associate pastor, and then at the ripe old age of 25 became the lead pastor, much against my wishes, but feeling like God invited us to take the next step. And we had elders that sensed we were the right fit and that they wanted to grow with us. And they really gave us a lot of freedom to grow into the role. And it was a great, great place to serve. And it was there that we went through our healing journey with Pure Desire, and then implemented the groups, and just saw a lot of couples and families find freedom from the Pure Desire groups ministry. And that was also what led to coming on staff as the executive director officially. So been doing that now for 3.5 years, but most of my background and experience is all with the church and with ministry. And still have, my dad is still a pastor at the same church he's been at now for 40 years.
Oh my.
30 years. I'm bad at math.
I mean, either one.
See, that's why I wasn't an accountant.
Either one is a lot.
I'm so bad at math, 30, 40, whatever. We moved there when I was 11, and so that would make sense why he's been there 30 years. And So love the church and just really enjoy how much we can do to help pastors find healing, and also for the church to understand that this ministry isn't something they have to run from or be afraid of. They really can do it at the local level. And we're passionate about that because we've seen it happen in the churches we were part of.
Yeah, and that's what I've appreciated with Pure Desire. I know I've had people in crisis. I've called down to Pure Desire and got them connected with a counselor. One was a guy that was struggling. Another was a spouse who was in crisis, and calling down to Oregon there was a huge benefit for them. The other thing I love is that you guys are working hand in hand with the local church. And in particular, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the book. I'd picked it up. It's called Safe. The subline is called Creating a Culture of Grace in a Climate of Shame. And it's really written for the local church, and in particular, creating the culture of grace that you talked about. And I mean, first of all, it's funny. We've got on our church a old bar sign, and we changed it to Grace on Tap. It's an old Philip Yancey quote. But it's funny how people get nervous about the word grace, that you've used there. And I'm just wondering, what do you mean when you talk about a culture of grace within the local church?
Yeah, I think what you bring up is we have this fear that if we're gracious, that basically we just overlook sin, anything goes. It's kind of this laissez-faire, like, hey, we're all okay before God and he'll work it out in the end. So let's not really worry about things like growth and discipleship and sanctification and actually having any, wise rules or guidelines we follow in our life. And really that's not grace. That's more acceptance, or even blind acceptance of behavior. Grace has to do with the person. Grace has to do with understanding that no matter what someone's gone through, where they've been, or even what they're currently in, that we are valuing, accepting them as a person who's made in the image of God, loved by him, and desires to see good in his life. And if we don't treat them as that loved, accepted person in their value, then they'll never feel safe enough to actually open up and deal with the behavior. So I think that's the mistake people make, is they try to apply grace to behaviors and just say, well, it means we overlook bad behavior, when it's really not the heart of grace. The heart of grace is that freedom to be who I am, to be loved, to be real, and then in that place of grace to actually deal with those behaviors because I feel safe enough and loved enough to actually confront the things in my life that need to change.
Yeah, like what is it that makes it hard, though, for people to come into a church? I mean, you spoke a little bit in your book about some of the things that I guess would be, I used as an opposite the phrase a climate of shame, which was the opposite of, from what I hear you saying, a culture of grace. So when you talk about a climate of shame, or how we should push back against that, what do you mean by that, and where are you going with that?
Yeah, what I associate is really a performance environment in a church is what breeds shame. So I don't think most churches intentionally would create shame or intentionally shame people. The shame happens more internally, where I go to a church where it feels like everybody has it together, all these nice little families and lives, and everyone's doing great. And then I shame myself because I know the things that I'm struggling with, what's going on in my life. And when there's no freedom to actually be real about the things I'm facing, because it seems like everyone else has it together, I walk out feeling a lot of shame about what I'm doing. And then I also feel like I have to play along with this performance culture and act like things are great or things are fine even when they're not. Trevor, what have you seen in that area of what we do that creates shame versus grace?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's the language that we use. Far too often in church we get, specifically around the area of sexuality, and we get people who are like, you're looking at porn, stop. Like, instead of going to that porn site, read your Bible or pray in a moment. And not really understanding that what we're doing is we're saying that if you get to that point and don't pray and don't read your Bible, then there's something wrong with you. And so we inadvertently shame people with our language. And I think that that's what Nick's getting at, is that it's not an intentional thing. But in our lack of being intentional about the language that we use, being aware of shame and the climate that we live in, then this is going to keep happening. And I think that that's something that the church has historically improved on that, and I still think we have room to grow in that as well.
Yeah, I think it's slowly changing it. I was looking in your book, you had four 4 steps or 4 parts of that. I just want to read them out. I thought they were great. Number 1, dare to be a sinner. 2, guard against a cleaned up confession. 3, find fathers, not older brothers. And 4, be willing to be a father, not an older brother. And I think those feel like to me that you're trying to counteract a shame culture. You want to address any of those?
Yeah, a lot of that is rooted in, you talk about being a father in the prodigal son story. And just the caricature there that I think Jesus was intentionally creating of how the father treated the son who came home versus the older brother.
Right.
The older brother who looked down on him, this despicable son that took your money and cheated on you and was out with whores and wasting your money. And I think the older brother's attitude was, it's okay if he's back, but he better pay for what he's done. He better show how sorry he is.
Right.
He better clean up his life and basically earn his way back into our good graces. And I think sometimes we treat people like that because we can feel like in our faith or in religion, we've worked really hard to toe the line, to do the right thing. And if others haven't, well, they need to go clean up their act and kind of earn their way back into the party. But what it means for us to be a father is that when someone makes the turn, and to me that's the important distinction, is that the father of the prodigal son didn't go chasing him down in the pig pen. And he didn't find him and say, I'm going to pull you out of here and get you home. Like, he was there watching and waiting. But he was waiting for the son to have made that turn and be coming back to him. And I think in the church, that's the environment we need, that when someone who's lost and stuck in something makes that turn towards faith, towards community, towards help, like, we need to recognize that for what it is, that's a beautiful moment. And that's something to be celebrated. And before they've even made any change in their life, that we welcome them and we encourage them and we even throw a party for them, that, man, we're just glad you're here, because we know that being here and being loved will lead you into change. But that really takes the heart of a father, that father that's waiting and watching just to show love to the son, not the heart of the older brother that has their arms, the way I think of the heart of the father, they've got their arms open as that prodigal comes back. The heart of the older brother, they've got their arms crossed. And it's like, well, you proved to me you're sincere. And then maybe we'll start to let you into our little club. And I think whether we mean to or not, a lot of times in churches, we come across as having our arms folded, like, hey, we kind of got it together here. And if you're going to be all messed up, go get your stuff together. Yeah. And when you can kind of show that you act like us, then we'll accept you. And that it really challenges people, like I was saying earlier. They feel like they've got to just play along and act like things are better than they are because they want to be accepted. They want to act like I can belong too. But even the people with their arm crossed, those older brothers, when we find out what's going on under the surface for them, their lives aren't nearly as put together as we think either. And so it's the freedom for everyone to be real and to say, this is who I am and where I'm at, and have the spirit of a father that says, welcome home, we're glad you're here. And in the right way, we will deal with our stuff.
And this is my hot take on this in the church is, I think that the church gets to a point where the reason why we have a hard time with the first 2 points, like dare to be a sinner and that really cleaned up confession, is I think that we're afraid that the world will realize that the church is just as sinful as the world. That we're somehow afraid that somehow counteracts our evangelism or the message of Christ, when in reality it's our broken. I'm a music guy. I was listening to a song yesterday by a guy named Dave Barnes, and he said it's a song for his kids, and he says, I hope that you see the brokenness. The brokenness in me is how the light got in. And just a really pretty image for me. But I realized that the church, we think that we have to look like we have it together so that we look different from the church, or different from the world, when in reality, we're no different than the world. We just have accepted and been saved by Jesus. So we're still messy. We still don't have it all together.
Yep.
And we think that won't be attractive to the world, when in reality, it's the raw, the authentic, the real, the messy that Jesus came to save. And so if we could just mirror that better, I think, to the world, my guess is, and this is unpredicated on anything except my just perspective and experience in the church, is that evangelism would skyrocket. We'd be willing to just be real and raw about what it actually means to be a follower of Jesus and the brokenness that we live in.
Well, a lot of that is, I think, kind of tied in with that whole shiny church
Yeah.
thing that we're trying to project. We don't want to mess with the product. Good Dave Barnes illustration. I saw him in Seattle last summer. So anyone that uses Dave Barnes or Andy Goulahorn, we're on the same track. Both of those.
I got you.
Those guys are great. So and great recovery imagery as well in those in both of those guys.
Yeah.
Hey, I think somehow a lot of us would go, okay, that sounds good, but what happens when it's the father in the example that's struggling? What happens when the leader is somebody that is bumping up against his own brokenness, is struggling with sexual brokenness, maybe his past is emerging, his issues are emerging, and all of a sudden, this whole idea of a culture of grace, okay, it sounds one thing for people, but as leaders, man, that is a whole different animal. And which is really kind of why I've tried to start this podcast to maybe press into some of those things. And so what do you think leaders need to be conscious of when they're wrestling with their own issues as well? How does that fit into what we're talking about here?
Yeah. My wife is a second grade teacher, and a really big idea in the world of education these days is having a growth mindset versus an arrival mindset. And they talk about how in students, it's so challenging if they've got that arrival mindset where a kid is saying, well, I'm smart, or I always know the answers, and they feel like they don't really then want to struggle. They don't want to admit if they don't know something. They don't want to raise their hand and ask questions because they think they've got to have this image. Where in education, it's that recognition that we're all growing and we're all learning. And even if you're the professor, you still can learn and grow because that's what gives us a healthy brain and approach to life. And it's amazing to me how well that fits onto our situation as followers of Christ, because I think we've created categories of like growth versus arrival, that if you're in any leadership capacity, if you're a staff member, an elder, a deacon, like you need to have arrived spiritually, which is really kind of silly thinking, because in my view, and I think in most people's theology, we'd agree that the process of becoming like Christ never ends. That we're not going to be truly free of sin in this world and our old nature until we arrive in eternity and God perfects us. So if that's the case, all of us are in process in some way, whether we're a leader or a brand new believer in Christ. And I think in the church, we don't give our leaders permission to be people who are still in process. But that's just the reality of our humanity, that we are also growing. And the other thing that I think we miss is that humans are not, we're not simple in terms of, it's not like, Trevor's at a 9 in his spirituality and I'm at a 4, and so I need to go be a 9 so I can be a pastor.
Right.
The truth is that we all have areas mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, where we have strong points and weak points. And I think that's the thing that happens to pastors, is because they maybe are a 9 in their theology. They're a 9 in their ability to preach or lead worship or do a youth lesson. They're maybe even in a 9 relationally. They're great with people, but maybe emotionally or in their sexual brokenness, they're still stuck at a 1 or a 2 in terms of their maturity. And so we make this mistake of just assuming, well, if they're a 9 in ministry, they must be really well-rounded in everything.
Right.
But the truth is, these other areas, particularly for leaders, just go unaddressed. And so what we're so passionate about is trying to create a church culture where in the areas where that leader still has some development to do, they can pursue it. They can help find growth and maturity and discipleship, and then not be treated that, well, because you're only a 2 in your emotional maturity, that invalidates your call. That invalidates your training. Because I don't think that's the case at all. That it's really possible that we can be fully equipped in a lot of ministry roles, but if no one has helped us mature in those other places, we're just kind of stuck there. So for pastors, I think it starts with us personally letting ourselves off the hook, because I know when I was the senior pastor and I was still struggling with pornography, I felt like I was supposed to be a 9 or a 10 in everything. And so where I wasn't, I just tried to fake it or act like I was. But if I'd have had freedom to ask for help, to get counseling, which eventually did come, it would have been such a blessing to me. And so I think for pastors listening, I would start there with that honest self-evaluation, say, where are you at? And if there's an area in your life you're not doing great, it doesn't invalidate your call. It doesn't invalidate God's ability to use you. It just means there's an area you still need some maturing. And if you will lean into that and allow others to help you grow there, it'll enhance everything else. But you've got to start with letting yourself get that help and not thinking, well, if I'm immature here, well, then I can't be a pastor, because I really think that's just a false dichotomy.
Yeah. I think a couple of things I see too with that idea. What's coming to mind is I think John Piper wrote that book, Brothers, We're Not Professionals.
Yeah.
That idea that you're not a professional, quote unquote, Christian, like pastors of the varsity team and everyone else is JV. We're all on the varsity team. There is no JV team in the kingdom, at least that I don't see it. Maybe there are people out there, but I think one of the things that when a pastor is unwilling to share his struggles to a degree with somebody, we inadvertently perpetuate the whole cycle. We actually are the ones who are creating that culture of shame and performance around ourselves because we're unwilling to break out of it and share, like, hey, maybe I'm struggling with getting angry at my wife, or maybe I'm struggling with being impulsive with my money, or maybe I have an unhealthy relationship with food, whatever it may be, or golf, or coffee, or whatever pastors struggle with. But I think the thing that I keep coming back to over and over again, and this is something even right now for me, not even functioning as a pastor, I have to remember God cares more about my health than my position. And so it's that idea that the soul care that it requires from the Lord for me, my investment in my own soul care is what God cares about. Because if I'm healthy, I can do just as much ministry wherever and whenever if I'm healthy. But if I'm unhealthy and I'm in a position that just brings me more pain, essentially it's just detrimental to ministry. So I would say that again, if you're a pastor, understand that God cares more about your health and the growth and maturity that you are setting yourself up for than the position you currently hold.
But can I just to say one other thing too, that you talk about, you feel like, well, I am one of those fathers in the church, so I need to be there for other people who need my help. And if I admit weakness, if I admit struggle, then I won't be able to help them. That's a message we can tell ourselves. But I actually found in my story, and I've heard in so many others, it's really not true. It's, I think, a voice the enemy uses to keep us in hiding. Because the reality was, when I started to share my story of transformation with our church body and talked about, I've been addicted to pornography, and we had to pursue professional counseling to get free, and God had to really do a work in my life. When I opened that door, which some people said, man, when you do that, people will leave the church because they want their pastor to be perfect. I actually found the opposite to be true, that it made people lean in, and it made more people show up, because they're like, well, wait a minute, if you as the father in our church have that freedom to be real, then I know it's safe for me to be real too. I know if you've been open about your addiction to pornography, I won't be condemned or kicked out because of my struggles with whether it's lust or gambling or my finances or anger. It just created that environment because the fathers in our church and the mothers, spiritually speaking, were able to be open and real about their journey and be people in process. Then everyone else realized, oh, it's safe for me too. So I found it actually increased my influence, not decreased it.
Yeah, Nick, I think that's, you talked about fighting against the celebrity culture in your book, which is what you're modeling. And you talk about allowing authenticity to make it up front. If you do that, which is what you guys are talking about, then you lead other leaders into authenticity, which was part of that. And that's huge. And it's possible a system might be so dysfunctional that you're given the boot. I recognize that.
Yeah.
I've heard of that scenario. But my question is, the types of people that we're called to be has to be out of a level of authenticity. Yeah. Tell me a little bit, because I know you guys have a number of pastors and you work with churches, not just churches in terms of helping people and families, but I'm sure you've worked with churches that are trying to step into this greater authenticity. Here's an example I've shared. A great Foursquare pastor, Jack Hayford. I was at his school in LA. This was many years ago. And if there ever was a guy that modeled authenticity, it was him. Oh my goodness. Unbelievable, talking about his struggles. And I always figured, hey, if Jack Hayford, who runs an entire denomination and one of the largest churches in that denomination, can do it, there's no excuse. Some say, well, maybe in a small church you can do that. I'm going,
right.
Forget that. That's just bogus, right? But there's got to be, when you're running into a scenario where pastors are dealing with things, or board members are trying to, wrestle with how do we respond to the secretary calls the chairman of the board and she's discovered porn on the church computer or some other variation of something like that. What have you seen as kind of best practices? Because in your book, you talked about an idea of church discipline that is around restoration as opposed to punishment, and can you guys speak briefly as to what you've seen as because I'm sure there's been churches where leaders have been in the middle of this.
Mm-hmm.
What are some best practices you guys would speak of?
Yeah, when I think of that, there's two sides. There's one, how can we be proactive? Like, how can we create a culture among our leadership where it's safe to get help and ask for help? And then when there is a situation that comes up, when something messy is discovered, how do we respond? So on the proactive side, I think what we've seen be so effective is when staff really, it starts at a leadership level. We've got a number of churches that just said, we're going to take our staff through the conference series, men and women, because we want them to understand what people are facing, and we want to understand what we're facing. And then as we go through it, we're going to give the appeal that, hey, as a staff member, if this is an area of your life that's not been fully redeemed yet, here's steps you can take. And so we've had churches and whole denominations that partner with Pure Desire to create a pathway and an avenue for a pastor to get help. We've got pastors-only groups that are meeting so that pastors are relating to one another as they go through that journey. And all of that is just intended to be proactive, to say, maybe your struggle is low level. Maybe it is only a couple of times a year, but if it hasn't been dealt with fully and finally, let's not chance it. Let's not assume that that's just going to go away, because likely it'll get worse at some point. So let's deal with it now. And then on the reactive side, a lot of that is contingent on the heart and the attitude of the leader that's in crisis, that's been discovered, that's been caught. And in my experience, thankfully, most leaders are repentant and humble. They wanted to get free of whatever they've gotten caught in. And so I think that's where we're saying our goal here is to restore you to the things God's called you to. So how do we walk with you? Because I think too many churches or denominations, their policies can work against them. It's like, well, we fire you, we send you away, and we say, go get better, and don't come back here. Which doesn't really communicate well to anyone else in your church. Like, man, if that's what happened to the pastor, I'm sure not going to talk about my struggles with pornography, because they fired him and sent him away. What if instead, and there are situations we would fully acknowledge, there are situations where a leader does need to step out of their role for a while. If there have been illegal things, if there have been immoral affairs and that sort of thing, they're not going to be able to continue. They may need some time away. But what if the church viewed that as, we want to walk through this with you, and if at the end of the process you're able to be reinstated even here, sometimes that's not practical, but sometimes it is. The heart and the attitude behind that'll be seen by the whole church. It says, man, he got caught up in something, but we can tell he was humbled by it, and they walked with him, and they didn't just blacklist him. It was, and this could be with a female too. I don't mean to say him exclusively. The way that just creates a culture for the whole church, I think, is really important. So those are the best practices, is to have something that is proactive, that you're offering. You're not waiting for the crisis or the mess to be exposed. You just acknowledge, hey, our staff, our leaders are normal people, so we're going to help them ahead of time. And then if something does come up, to say, how can we walk this journey with you and continue to be your community even as you're finding restoration? What would you add to, like, how we help churches and pastors? And
No, I think, and I mean, Nick, and it might be a generous assumption that most pastors would just own up to it if caught or exposed, but man, the posture of your heart in that moment can dictate a lot moving forward. If you downplay it and like, oh, it's really not that big of a deal, it's only this many times or whatever, like restorations, the journey to restoration is going to be so much more difficult. So the idea of when exposure, if and when exposure happens, to man, you might be the most motivated you've ever been in your entire life to deal with something, and by God's grace, He uses that from time to time in all of our lives. Maybe it's not in the area of sexuality, maybe it's in another area. I can give you prime examples from my life on how God called me out in some ways publicly, and it finally made me willing to address some stuff that I was unwilling to do it. But then also understand, as you're stepping into this is not something that you like pray away. It's like a 30-day thing and you're done. This is something that has to become a lifestyle. and has to become something that is modeled not only in your ministry, but also in your home, in your marriage, in your relationships with friends.
Yep.
But to understand that that level of commitment is what's going to ensure health, and really make sure that you don't have to get asked to leave ministry and then restored again. You don't want this to happen multiple times. One's enough for this. And so I think that just making it that top level commitment, and just, I'll just give you an example. Like I, a few years ago, was really, really overweight. And for me, I have realized over the last 3 years that if I continue to go back to old behavior, even though I've lost a bunch of weight, I'll gain it right back. I've learned that the way I have to eat has to be a lifestyle, it has to be something I'm committed to. And I've seen the way that it affects me and the people around me. When I eat poorly, I'm groggy and I'm cranky and I don't sleep well. So it's like there's just more at play than maybe just this one area of life that really does flood over into other areas. So making it something that's a lifestyle thing is what I would encourage any pastor to consider.
Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful to hear. And what I hear is, and in the book, I encourage people to pick it up, is to say it comes down to culture and posture. A culture makes the posture easier, but it still comes down to our choices. And just say briefly again, how do people get a hold of you guys? And just what is the vision of Pure Desire as it relates to strengthening the local church and even leaders in terms of this whole tsunami of sexual brokenness that we're kind of seeing hitting our shores?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the mission is just to be the safe place for people to find hope and healing, to develop sexual integrity, to restore broken marriages, and to establish healthy relationships. We are people who have lived this. So it's not like we just did a bunch of research and went and got degrees and then want to help people. We were the addicts. We were the people betrayed. We were in ministry and lost position and title. And so we've been there. And so there's just this, and we empathize with you. We understand what you, your church, your people are going through. And that's truly the heart of what we do, is we want to come alongside and help the church run their groups, not create a Pure Desire ministry in their church, but to create their ministry in their church that we get to be a part of. So look at us as like the Sherpa taking you up the mountain, not the hero of the story. But through the work of the Holy Spirit and through the guided resources, we just try to be that guide for people.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is at the end of the day, the win for us is when the local church owns this for themselves, because that's really where we think the battle has to be won. That people can come to us for help. And so, as you asked, at puredesire.org, people could find an online group to join. And sometimes for a pastor or a leader, that's a really safe place to start, because they can be a part of a video group online that's very confidential and with people that don't live in their city. And there's not that fear of who will they tell or who else will know. And it allows in some confidentiality to really start that process. So there's a groups tab, and you could look for other churches in your area. That was actually my story. I started out by going to a group that was 30 miles away. And at the time, I thought it was an inconvenience, but looking back, I realized how helpful that was, that I didn't have to deal with stuff with people I might know. I got to go a little removed, and that was actually great to do in person. So you'll find a map there. You can find where we have groups currently with churches listed. And by the way, if you're listening and your church isn't on our map, but you've got groups, we'd love to add you, because whether or not you have groups that have room in them, it is just a way for people to see what's around them and what's available and get information. And the online groups are there as well. And then what you can also find at puredesire.org is more information on our partnership program. Because if people are listening, that they say, man, how can I get my church involved or my network of churches? We'd love to talk about creating that pathway so that staff and leaders know, my church has said they want me to get help, and they actually have a tool I can use. It's not just words, like there's something here. And so go there and you'll find our contact information as well. And you already mentioned our podcast, but if they're looking for another place to get great info, week in and week out, we try to have the conversations that very few other people are having, and create that safe community for people to learn and grow and keep moving forward in their own journey.
Well, it makes a major difference, guys, that you've walked it, you've struggled with it, that the people that are helping people are in that place. You've both been pastors, and it makes all the difference in the world. I remember listening to a guy that talked about this whole ministry you had with around porn. He says, but I've never struggled with it. I'm just going, oh, dude, like, don't even talk to me. Right. It just doesn't ring true to me. So anyways, guys, thank you again. It's great to have you on the podcast. And I encourage everyone to check out Pure Desire. I know we've got some groups locally, and also there's some great conferences as well, things that are happening. So anyways, again, huge thank you to you guys. I'm going to have you guys hold on for a sec. I'm going to hit pause. And again, thanks for all you listeners, and we'll see you next week.